Okay, I think I'll get started now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's ESG webinar called Customer Success Unlocked. We do this monthly. Normally, I do it with my co-host and colleague and wonderful friend, Marley Wagner, but she's taken a couple of days off, so I'm doing this by myself. I'm Peter Armaly, Vice President of Customer Success at ESG, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar titled Post-Sale Ecosystem. This is a subject that both my guest and I are very familiar with and love to talk about. So I hope I expect it to be a very fruitful conversation. But before we get started and before I introduce our guest, a few quick housekeeping notes. I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be made available to you within 24 hours after the webinar. Today's session will be a fireside chat style interview. Just really a conversation, and you won't be seeing any slides on the screen. But rest assured, your Zoom is working just fine. Throughout today's session, you're welcome to submit your questions via the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. Our guest today is Chris Singh, the Chief Customer Officer of Blackbaud, which is located in Charleston, South Carolina. Chris lives in Ontario near me, actually, but I guess he's spending some time down at headquarters in Charleston, South Carolina. And I'd like to ask him to say a few words about himself and maybe a few words about Blackbaud as a way of introduction. So Chris, welcome, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, my friend. Happy to be here. I was eagerly awaiting this. I do a lot of these podcasts, webinars, seminars, and when your name popped up and the topic was floated, I was very happy because it's such an easy way of speaking with you. Our varied experiences in both former companies we came from intersected on a human level on many fronts. So Chris Singh, I'm currently the Chief Customer Officer for Blackbaud. Prior to Blackbaud, I was the head of customer success at SAP. I've been at SAP, for about 18 years and had an amazing career there where I led innovation, engineering, retail, different facets of jobs. And purpose came calling about a year ago, and I joined Blackbaud. Blackbaud is the world's largest social good company. They produce software, data insight, services to really drive the nonprofit sector and the education sector. And in its purpose, I mean, if you look at the purpose, it's tremendous on educating kids to homeless shelters, to air ambulances that rescues people. It's very exciting. It's very purposeful, and that's the mission that brought me here on board at Blackbaud.
Good stuff. Chris, you and I have known each other, I think maybe 3 years or so. So I knew you when you were at SAP, and it's interesting. I was at Oracle at the time, but our backgrounds. You were at SAP for, as you said, maybe 18 years or so. I spent a lot of time hopscotching all over the place, but largely kind of doing similar things, sales, support, services, customer success. So it feels like we have a bit of a kinship there. And when we met in conversation, I just felt we had a lot in common. So I was really excited to also invite you to be a guest on this webinar. So why don't we just get into it? And the first question that we created was, this session is called Post-Sale Ecosystem. So tell us what that means. But before you do, let's remind everyone about the dictionary definition. The dictionary definition of ecosystem is it's a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscape, work together to form a bubble of life. So with that reference point, Chris, how should companies be thinking differently in order to make a functioning ecosystem a reality?
Brilliant. I love that dictionary definition because it puts things into stark reality for us. And I love the fact that you've incorporated the word differently in there, because quite honestly, if you look at the cloud, and even if it's a fit to standard environment, there are numerous integration, there's numerous customization outside of your fit to standard that needs to connect to make a business process work. And most people who make or produce software at one point in time had this notion that anything beyond their APIs or extensions is somebody else's problem. I need to double down to the software that I produce and really make sure that what I do is good. But the world is connected, people are connected, and people want collaboration more than confrontation, especially in business. You can't thrive today without, Internet of Things, AI means that X needs to speak to Y. And if you're a software provider and you have X, you have to make sure that when you build things that you have connectivity in mind. And I think a lot of people have learned over the years, especially in pure cloud play, that what they used to perceive as threats with other point solutions outside of their solutions connecting to it has suddenly become a competitive advantage, which means that the more sticky you make your solution, the tougher it is for you to get displaced by somebody else. So if you build a great integration into Y from your X, you now have this business process that's expanded, and the mission critical aspects and attributes of it to any companies have now dramatically expanded. So I think this whole notion of zero-sum games of saying what is mine and what's yours is yours has gone out the window. And I think where companies need to think differently, it's that from the first line of code that's written, we have to start thinking about these connections and how we make it easier for companies to connect, because complexity has also lent itself in integration for it to be a nightmare in finger pointing. Things like diagnostic capabilities. The minute the problem pops up, you and I came from SAP and Oracle respectively, where it's big ERP systems connecting to thousands of systems. And every time there's an exception, it's always whose problem it is, east, west, north, south. So I think now companies really have to rethink this inclusivity in the ecosystem to make sure that symbiotic behavior exists, vendors across vendors, and collaborating on their customers' best intentions. I think that's the big shift.
Yeah, and you and I go back prior to the subscription economy really taking hold and taking off. Do you think this is just really a part of the continuum of evolution that cloud technologies are driving and making things much more flexible and speedier requirements are necessary to satisfy the customer ultimately? You mentioned that you can't really point fingers anymore. I mean, you can, but it's not going to solve anything. So I feel like this is just more momentum moving into that world where the expectations are rising exponentially. And does it make sense then that companies need to really get a grip on the entire ecosystem that's required in order to deliver the outcomes that they think their customers expect? Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, 100%. I think if you look at the psychology of it and you look at customers, in the subscription economy, you get turfed easily. That's a big differentiator. Whereas on-prem, if you have these on-prem installations and you run into trouble, it's vendors go figure it out, and whoever emerged with the line of code that's the problem or the integration technical aspects of it will resolve it. And quite often you will see people spin their wheels and go through all kinds of issues because they know that to change off an on-prem system will take 3, 4, 5 years. Now with the subscription economy, customers can bolt and lift and move fairly easily. It's not as easy as people think, but fairly easily. So you can get displaced. That's a psychological aspect. So you have to behave much, much better. But I think people are also learning that by collaborating, this stickiness that I spoke about, you're expanding your footprint in terms of order of importance to customers. So if you don't start giving great APIs and extension points for people to integrate to, your competitors certainly will. And I think that mindset of, if you think of the cloud, it's continuous innovation at speed of light. And as those innovations come, people want to connect to it and build amazing processes that you will never have the financial backing to do.
Yeah.
And you preclude yourself from those kinds of innovation, if you are locked and hard-coded in what you're doing and you don't have this expansive mind about inclusion, for sure.
Yeah, like closed-mindedness is not going to work going forward. And what we've been talking about up to this minute is really more of an external kind of ecosystem. And I've delved into partner success and been involved in that. And I feel like in a way that companies are better positioned to handle the exterior ecosystem because it's really business to business. You have contracts and expectations that are kind of written down. And by and large, it can work in a much more frictionless way in a sense. But I would sometimes argue that it's harder to manage the internal ecosystem. It's because of organizational silos have been around for 1,000 years. They still exist. They're probably one of the biggest barriers to a customer-centric ecosystem that we're talking about. We could spend the whole hour talking about strategies to break down cross-functional barriers, but I want to focus on how you see the role of the CCO, Chief Customer Officer, in that. What should CCOs and their peers in the C-suite be doing to make this better? And related, what role should the CCO play in the C-suite in making sure the company heads in the right direction of true customer centricity?
Yeah, no, I think it's such a crucial thing, right? And I love what you've said about internal, because if you look at the internal, sometimes that internal culture, if you don't start with that premise of getting the internal culture locked in, there is no way you can get the external piece where you'd want it to be. Because the minute that external engages, if you line everything, the minute you have a breakage or a silo, that experiencer from the outside is going to experience it. And then it's just going to be all hell breaks loose. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to make sure that you set the tone right from the way you write products. You have to be inclusive of certain kinds of easiness, self-deployment, self-configuration, guided configurations, APIs that has very simple connections that you can make, well documented. If you think of education and learning, as a company, as a CCO, I think of end-to-end customer lifecycle, but I also think of partners and ecosystem at play. People who may not be direct providers, but could they have access to certain kinds of information on your company and your solutions that lend themselves to build something? For example, we have marketplaces where we can put non-Blackbaud solutions in, and our customers can go in there and we don't feel threatened by it at all. Mm-hmm. Our customers can go through it and really scan catalogs and really understand what business processes these and use business cases these will support. And then they go out and adopt it. So I think all of the enablement, learning, training, building products, and making sure that you have a marketplace that's open. And it's not just about you and your direct partners, but have an open platform for people to come into. I think that really works very well for people to come in and engage. Because the minute you get protectionist oriented, you're going to contract on who you can serve, because you can't serve the world. Yeah. And the minute you get to this openness, people realize that you have saved them a lot of work. For example, if you're hunting for certain kinds of contingent labor connection that you'd like to make from any solution, and you have to go out and source that contingent labor software, and you come into your primary provider and they say, hey, by the way, why are you doing all of that? You can easily go to this marketplace, and there is a solution there. It's not ours, but they connect fairly well, and to the best of our knowledge, they've built an integration directly into us. Right away, that saves the customer so much time, and partners who are in there, it brings this viability to them, and it improves our stickiness in the process. So it's this, this ecosystem that makes everybody thrive and survive, because we're all connected in one way or another.
And so I like that depiction of kind of like the openness of it, and kind of admitting at the corporate level that you can't do it all. Your customers need more than you can do in probably a reasonable amount of time, and kind of in a financial time effort as well. So what about the CCO though? Do you take a lead role in persuading the rest of the C-suite to adopt that point of view? Is that kind of like how you would see a CCO performing?
Absolutely. Outside of the fiduciary responsibility, experiential, and outcomes you're trying to seek for your customers, none of those things can be had if you don't have this internal and external connectivity, right? So the CCO role is to look at all the touch points of our customers throughout their life cycle, every single one in a moment that matters, and really saying, how do we orchestrate with value throughout all of those moments that matter, and removing any silos and do silo busting. I mean, that's a big role for the CCO internally and externally. And then for the external ecosystem, again, quite often, a lot of organizations are so internally focused that they lose the essence of what's outside and how great you can be when you connect to things that matters for customers. So part of my function certainly here is to highlight the total customer life cycle, what we can bring to them, when we can bring it to them, and how prescriptively we can bring it to them. Because we're the experts. We are supposed to be the expert in the industry, not just in Blackbaud solution, but in the industry. And the minute you start elevating your thoughts to go from a solution provider to an industry provider, you have to think ecosystem and you have to think expansion, and you have to bring that at all levels. Now, you've got, at least I'm lucky, we've got an amazing CEO who loves innovation. He loves the ecosystem. He loves building off of it. And he's historically seen how well ecosystem can contribute to companies' objectives. So that's an easy sell, or CIO, same thing. CFO gets it, because in terms of revenue expansion and stickiness, especially when you look at the retention side, sometimes you can white label certain kinds of partner solutions. Sometimes you may not be able to monetize off them, but the true monetization comes when you do get that 4 or 5% higher retention, because you've been able to integrate to an external process that solidify your presence in that customer's mission or purpose, as an example.
Got it. That's really great. And from our audience, Mike Kennedy asked a question in the chat, but I picked it up rather than he didn't ask in the Q&A, but I'll ask it anyways because I think it's a good one. It's related to what you're just talking about. And so he wants to know, what are the top metrics to measure the CCO on? And I'd like you to answer it in kind of in the framework of how you just talked about it, the CCO playing that larger role in making sure the rest of the C-suite understands the benefits to the company, but also to the customers and all the kind of internal stakeholders of kind of behaving in a certain way. So with that in mind, what do you think the top metrics are to measure a CCO on?
I think obviously customers is at the center of what you do. And putting really key customer metrics in place. At Blackbaud, as an example, we sell outcomes right at the point of sale. We say, look, these are the outcomes you're trying to have, and here are the outcomes that you're buying. And then we relentlessly pursue that outcomes with assets that we're building around those outcomes and outcome realization. We have to make sure that those outcomes are captured and we can quantify it, because people speak about outcomes and it's frustrating in a way, because in most cases, it's not observable. You can't measure it, you can't quantify it, but yet we call it an outcome. So it's very subjective into whether you hit it or not. In our case, we are looking at quantifying value to customers via value scoring, where we can look at those outcomes now and say, check mark, outcome achieved. We also have this I know NPS is getting a bad rap in many cases, and customer effort score is an example. But it's really important that you're providing products, services, data insight, and expertise to customers to empower them to really achieve their missions. Now, we want to make sure that we are measuring all of those things and we can replay it back as a value to say outcome achieved. And by the way, we have driven certain kinds of financial metrics for you as a customer in terms of what we have been able to realize. So that's on the customer side. The experiential side, really important. I just spoke about two personas we chase after. One, the persona that buys and does the procurement to know what they're thinking. And then the persona that really doubles down on the usage of the software and solutions. In that case, we've got both sides covered, and we're very, very circumspect about which persona we survey in these experiential surveys in the decision makers. So now we can say NPS really targets the persona of the buyer, and customer effort score goes distinctly after the persona of the users. In there, we get the experiential metric. So you've got this outcome metric, you've got this experiential metric, and then, as a CCO, you have to also think about Blackbaud and what the returns are. So if you look at GRR, gross revenue retention, NRR as an example, those are metrics that you must use to really substantiate all of the teams and what they're doing. back. And then, I had done this formula where customer success is equal to customer experience plus customer outcome plus employee experience. I think it's so important. Much of the cloud is really about, I think it was, who was it that asked the question?
Mike Kennedy.
Mike, I think so much of cloud and it's about mindset and it's about culture. And if you don't have your employees having the right mindset and culture, there is no way you can orchestrate for the customer. So some of the metrics we use is the employee engagement survey and leadership score, what they were telling us about the leadership. We asked explicit about leadership. And based on those scores, we really take a look at whether we're hitting our mark on KPIs. And since we instituted a program about a year ago, we are seeing significant improvement in NRR, GRR, and the customer effort score, and NPS is starting to go up because we have this listen, learn, act. The act part is really crucial for us, as an example.
Yeah, that's the piece that people really end up failing on, I think, in many cases. And Mike asked another question, but I think you may have answered it too. He asked, do you use surveys to measure success and value? And I think you did. You talked about
we use survey to get, we use surveys transactionally also. So immediately after an implementation, we'll do a transactional survey, or during implementation, where we would say, Mike, halfway in, is the implementation on time, on track, quality? And if the answer back is no, we can immediately react to it. So we do these moments that matter, but we don't survey fatigue our customers. We choose very key moments to do that right after an onboarding. Did the onboarding provide the value you were seeking? So we have the persona of NPS tackling the buyer, customer effort score tackling the user,
right,
and transactionally going after those moments that matter. But the scoring is entirely based on value, quantifiable value. We said you were going to go and try and raise $2 billion in 3 years. We put some plays in place for you to do that. We compare how best companies in your fundraising events does it. Did you or did you not hit that? And we do have key milestones along the way that tracks progress relative to that. Those are the kinds of quantification we're seeing. Your donor list, you need to grow it by 15%. Did it grow by 15%? You need to really clean up that donor list to make sure you weed out the non-donors from the people who give. Have you done so? So all of those are things we now quantify back to our customers and really get a value scoring in.
So Chris, in 13 or 14 months, you seem to really understand the business. I want to go back a little bit further now, switching gears a little bit. There's another question from the audience that I want to get back to later, but I want to just pivot a little bit and talk about your illustrious career at SAP. That's a massive German tech company. Everyone knows it. It's been around for, I think, 40 years or so. Really, there was a time where they were wagging the tail of the entire business world because everyone was trying to scramble to integrate their various business service functions into a single, more efficient resource planning engine. You talked about Oracle and SAP doing that, focusing on that. You were there almost the entire period, I would say, in a variety of leadership roles. What did your working for that length of time in positions that were meant to drive success for large enterprise customers teach you about business and about yourself?
I'm just going to maybe give a quick little story. I was sent, I just signed on as head of engineering for the digital business services, about 45,000 employees. Back then, HANA was SAP in-memory technology, brand new to the market. We had put it out and it had struggled at one of a very large customer, 24 terabyte scale out as an example. And I was sent in to resolve the technological challenges there. One, I knew very little about HANA. Two, fear factor, 1,000% because of the lack of deep knowledge on it. But there I quickly realized that no matter how much deep technology is, it's about people. And people come before technology. That at the end of the day, you're dealing with a CIO who has got his or her neck on the line, and they have made a spend of $400 or $500 million, and they need to defend that spend. And when you think of it in those terms, at the human level, the minute you commit yourself to easing some human being out of a bad situation, good things starts to happen if I had led with the technology, trying to go in and scale 24 terabytes, scale up, scale out, and compression factors and those things, quite honestly, I would have failed, and certainly we would not have been successful at this very large customer that now really put HANA on a great path forward, because we proved scaling out as an example. So I think you lead with people and technology. It's really, really important that you lead with people, because technology transformation is constant. I mean, how many times have you heard, Peter, that we need to digitally transform, and then you say we need an outcome economy, and next thing you'll be something that just keeps pressing businesses, and you have to keep transforming. And if you don't, you're not adaptive to change, and you view change as adversarial or disruptive to your psyche, it's going to be very difficult for you to navigate these kinds of jobs. You have to be fluid at change. You have to be accepting of change. And you have to make sure you understand your place in that change. And at the end of the day, it's not technology that's changing. It's people who consume the technology that must go through ginormous amounts of change management in doing so. So I think human beings, change management, and being really plugged in to technology is key. And curiosity solves every single challenge you have as an adult. Look at children, they're curious, and Peter, as you know it, they probe, they dig, they scratch, and before you know it, they have the answer.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest job of leaders is to manage the change, is to introduce the change, manage the change, get people inspired by the change, and really fully on board. Because you're right. I mean, the technology there's waves and waves of technology, and so much of it is rich and full functioned and wonderful stuff. But it doesn't do anything if you can't get the people to understand why the work needs to change. Work is a big part of everyone's lives, and you're changing something really huge and fundamental. So you need them on board. And I like that, Chris, the way you just described it. It's people first, and technology is part of that picture. But if you don't have the people, it's not going to work. Right?
I remember really quickly, and I was working for a company that SAP acquired, and this CEO was looking to buy a help desk service. And I was walking on the floor, and he was with the CEO, and they stopped me in the hallway, and the CEO said to me, "I have an important question for you. You're a manager here. Who would you put first, your people or the customer?" And honestly, I was young, this is about 20 something years ago. And I was petrified, because I thought, you know what, it's our employees, because if they're not satisfied, how in the world are you going to be satisfied? So the science of people, everybody's leading, whether you have direct remits of people or not, in one way or another, you're leading. People, you can always lead somebody who doesn't know something, even though you don't have the title of leadership. So I think this employee experience factor is really huge also, and these whole change management and leading through examples and so forth.
Wonderful. So why Blackbaud now? We mentioned you were at SAP for a long time, rich career, really fulfilling, I imagine. So what is it about their mission that speaks to you and compelled you to join 14 months ago?
Yeah, you and I are very similar, Peter. I mean, I've made a great career. I've been blessed. Somebody upstairs smiled, and I've had a fortunate career. Sometimes things land in my lap. I wonder how it came. And SAP has just been ginormously good to my family and I, and a whole bunch of ecosystems, speaking of friends and cousins and so forth. So, in life for me, technology, like I said, you put people ahead of technology. Blackbaud is so rich in purpose. Some of these missions just sometimes drive you to, you look at cancer societies, stroke, Alzheimer's, trying to find cures for it, people who are struggling, destitute people, people who are homeless, people who have accidents that need help, children, education, giving education to kids, making sure that it's done. You're connecting alumni with parents and kids and schools. You're driving curriculums. You're making people smarter. You're creating the next generation of not only intellectuals, but people who have things that they're going to give to society at large. And when I think that my livelihood is earned through those means and methods, and our customer mission becomes our purpose, it's a freaking powerful thing.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really, really important. Everybody, when I left SAP, I obviously was under NDA. I couldn't disclose yet where I was going in my farewell. People were figuring, oh, he's going to Microsoft or he's going to one of the big four. And they were shocked because they thought, who is this Blackbaud company? What do they do?
Mm-hmm.
So purpose was really, really at the heart of why I'm on board here.
That's good. I was aware of them, actually. Maybe I'm one of the few people who kind of knew what they were up to. And I admire them. So I guess in a nutshell, you're an idealistic person too. And this allows you to kind of match that kind of maybe not latent or hidden, but idealism within you to the ability to kind of execute at a broader level and maybe impact other people's lives.
Yeah, I think if you're genuine with yourself, and I think the ultimate kindness to yourself is to really, when you do introspections, to look and see what are you about and what do you want to be about. And if something meets that purpose, then there's nothing more powerful than saying yes in that moment.
Mm-hmm. So let's, speaking of Blackbaud, just go a little bit for a brief, not too long. I just want to kind of explore a little bit how customer success is done there, because our audience is almost all probably customer success professionals. And so they're probably interested maybe in how Blackbaud does this. And maybe do you guys do it in a particular way that, because you've got a lot of familiarity with the community of customer success, maybe Blackbaud does things a little differently than maybe what our audience is familiar with? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think I'm so proud of, as a matter of fact, we just moved from a speed to success. We called it a model where we were rapidly deploying what we feel is the world-class customer success model. And we just converted from project into business as usual. And it was a very proud moment. About an hour ago, I was commanding the team. At Blackbaud, we sell, really at the point of sale. We declare what the outcomes are. We use Gainsight as a customer success platform to capture those outcomes. We do relentless success planning relative to those outcomes, but we've also built our assets, to really tie into those outcomes and really focus on delivering on those outcomes. So what are some of those assets? Education and learning, the webinars that we run, the innovations that are coming, and how does it tie into those outcomes? The usage at the outcome level, frequency, not at the module level, but at the outcome level, we are tracking it and trapping it and really seeing how we can optimize that. We have a value scoring that now seeks to look at how those outcomes are being achieved. And we will play it at executive business review and quarterly business review with the customers. Data insight is really important to what we're doing. So interrogating data and really making sure you get the insight. Plus, we have 40 years of doing this. We have historic insight into each one of the verticals that we run, like education, healthcare, and so forth, nonprofits. Each one of those, we know what industry best looks like. And how do we benchmark what current customers are doing relative to industry best, and the delta gap coming back to them with plays and how they can change or morph to adjust to that. We have a robust onboarding program that introduces the CSM right at the onboarding. So right into the implementation phase, we have the speed to value that we're now deploying, pre-configured solutions and so forth in the implementations to speed it up and really get that piece, speed to value, much more quickly realized. So in a nutshell, that's the customer success program. Some of the other assets we have built is functional expertise at no cost to customer as part of their subscription, because it stands to reason if you're giving these innovations, customers will have questions about how these innovations will work within their ecosystem. Right. How does it work and connect to X, Y? Who's outside? Who's using mobile technologies outside? We can now come in and give you an outside perspective on what are some of the partner ecosystem you can connect to as part of that engagement. And that functional expert team is really important. I've overlaid that with a role where we have almost a chief architect who's responsible for the partner ecosystem and understanding the solutions that they're running. And he brings deep insight into not only engagement, into cataloging who does what, okay, so we can bring those into engagement. So in total, that's That's our success model.
It sounds very robust, Chris, and very kind of, I call it advanced. I like the idea of how you guys are using benchmarking to help customers. I think I've always argued that the benchmarking piece, it's hard work, but that brings so much benefits to the broader ability to kind of scale and extend better service and outcomes to a wider array of customers. What role did the customer play in the development of this model? How involved were the customers?
Yeah, it's the minute I got here, I wanted to make sure that we were not writing a book from our perspective. Mm-hmm. So I engaged with customers immediately, right from inception, day one. Hey, what are some of your key challenges that you're seeing? How can we overcome it? The emergence of functional experts here, where it's part of your subscription, was as a direct result of feedback gained from customers where they complain vehemently. You produce something, you give us release notes, you may have a webinar. In that webinar, you spew out what the release does, but you have hundreds of innovations coming. How are we to know when and how quickly? And we want to double click on it, and we don't have that outlet. So their direct feedback resulted in this. I created a critical response center, a CRC, based on customers where we really treat escalation as a science. And we have gone as far as in our call tracking system, the customer can click on an escalate now, and it escalates their issue. It goes into a specialized group who works with trend analysis and our engineering team. So we can have this real emergency-like treatment of customers. All of those things were direct results of what the customer feedback has been, even forward customer success planning, where the customers were saying, look, you guys are somewhat proactive, highly reactive. How can we become a lot more guided? And that's where we double down on our prescriptive guidance, where we come in and say in the success plan, you should do this, this, and this to achieve these outcomes. So all of those things combined were all direct. I had meetings with the executive advisory boards. I had meeting with direct customers at our trade show, had meetings with several customers, and relentlessly pursued what they were telling us. Plus, we've had this mechanism where we listened and we learned, but we didn't act very well on what the customers were telling us. So that became a little bit of a dissatisfaction with customers. We keep telling you guys what's wrong, and nobody was listening, or we didn't see this action coming back. So this act part was really important. So we took all of the inputs from customers received in those areas and really convert them into actionable paths forward that you see today. Okay. And we're starting to see some really great progress on many, many fronts.
That's pretty incredible, because I know how much work is involved in setting all that up and making it actually come to life. I was going to skip this question, but I feel like that what you just talked about warrants me asking this. So in your role as CCO, you oversee the various customer-facing organizations that together are focused on delivering the success your customers need. What are the methods you employ to drive efficiencies across those customer-facing organizations? And the reason that I want to ask is because you said my favorite word in the last answer. You said science, and I feel like we can say we believe in collecting empirical data and use a scientific approach. I know how hard that is in big organizations. So can you speak to that as in your role as a CCO?
Yeah, no, look, scalability is king. Or queen for that matter, right? You can't get away without scaling. The only way you can scale, people use self-service, self-guided, do-it-yourself, all of those things. Mm-hmm. But we need to go a little bit beyond that, because customers also have their own efficiencies they're trying to get. And last thing they need to do is chase around where to find something in a KB or where they can go for a webinar. We have really doubled down on automation, really, and looking at not only AI, but automation that seeks to bring these efficiency gains to our customers, whilst looking at lowering not only human capital, but reducing the mistakes that are made when a human is involved. So if you look at some of these checks that we will do, which are called success checks, we may query for performance related to make sure an event, before you spin up your event, that the database is behaving well, that your throughput, your network, all of these things are robust enough. We will do these automated checks now. Previously, it used to take a human being time to go in there. So I think this whole idea of automation is so crucial. And what the team has done in automating data load into Gainsight and into our products so that we can have these relative insight that we're seeking has just been amazing. Because if we were doing, we started out doing it manually and it was untenable. We had to say, look, this is going to take like 15, 20 people just doing this piece. And when the team teamed up with our engineering team to really start creating product-centric things, writing things in certain kinds of standard formats where you can export it easily and you have flags that identify what transaction type it is, as an example, we're now able to really double down on that aspect of it. So I think this whole ability to scale through automation, AI, and really driving that has been very consequential towards efficiency gains, not only for us, but for our customers. If you think of our digital segments of customers, we're getting to a point where we can now look to export an executive business review or a quarterly business review. And then our customers can consume that in their own leisure, where you don't have to call a meeting, 90 minutes, 10 people in there. You can send it to them, they click on it, and they have all of their value being replayed at their convenience, at their time, as an example. So that's been the biggest efficiency gain, I would say.
That's hugely customer-centric. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll ask the next question. So what are a few words of caution you'd give a younger Chris Singh about what it takes to be a successful executive, both in large enterprises and smaller ones too?
Yeah, I think, it's good to be fearless, right? The caution for me would be, if I had to look back, it's an interesting question. I think fear is such an inhibitor to many things, right? This notion of, it's now popular to say, oh, I let people make mistakes and they learn from it. I mean, if I burn down the whole building, that's an unrecoverable mistake, as an example. Mm-hmm. But this notion of fear and leading through fear, managing through fear, coding through fear, supporting through fear, doing customer success work with fear, I think it's such an inhibitor to anything you do, because you never know, in the concept of nothing ventured, nothing gained. You have to put something on the line. So that's one aspect of it. Fear, definitely, I would say, you should try your best. Those voice of doubt and voice of, oh, it's not going to work, or what if I fail, burn them. And then two, a lot of people emulate something that is right for Peter Armaly and right for Chris Singh and right for ESG and right for Blackbaud, but may be wrong for Mike and wrong for the company that he's in. I've seen a billion times of people rushing to emulate. When customer success first came out, people rushed in and they threw a whole bunch of resources at it. And when asked, how are you going to pay for this? They didn't have a good answer back in saying, hey, retention renewal, which sometimes is 3 and 5 years before you start realizing your returns. Didn't know how to answer it. And then the model got a black eye and they took a pounding and they were let go and so forth. So I think fear, ease that out. And then, be careful what you emulate and really understand your own journey as a human being and your own company's journey, and really seek to understand where you're going to go, because most journeys are not identical. They're learning blocks on journeys, but you have to discern, because what Peter may choose to do first could really dictate success. For example, if I had come in and I had said, well, I'm going to do data first rather than onboarding, and a good onboarding experience as an example. Yeah. Right away, you could have this big misfit of saying, whoa, customers are lining up in the queues. They're just getting bogged down in the onboarding. They're dissatisfied. And I've got this beautiful data thing over here, because most people tell you lead with data. And it's such a buzzword everywhere. Your natural tendency would be jump on that and get on it. So I think your own journey is defined by you, and your company's journey is dictated by your own sets of finances, your own KPIs, your own challenges, your own sets of culture. And when you understand that really intrinsically well, then you will discern what to pick from in the wide array of what's there in technology, in finance, in success, in every single thing you do. I've seen a lot of mistakes in this space.
Me too, 100%. It does take a certain amount of wisdom and strength to do that, I would say, to make sure you're not just adopting everyone else's best practices. It's good to be knowledgeable, to be made aware, to educate yourself, of course, but don't blindly apply something that might not be appropriate for your environment, for your customers. So I agree, Chris, that you need to study this stuff and study your own company and study yourself. You know, can you actually lead this effort? You know?
No, you're right. If you look at really quickly, if you look at a company, for example, that's a growth company, which means top line is really important. They may compromise, like Salesforce did in the early going. They may compromise margin to really accelerate growth. And then you may move and you may deploy a set of strategies there. I see a lot of people trying to implement, let's say, Salesforce methodologies early on. And their company was more rule of 40, margin conscientious. And it bombed because it was like, hey, whoa, you can't spend all this money. We got to really stay focused on also these cost constraints and making sure that we're getting proper return on the contribution line. So you have to be careful on what you're deploying based on your own sets of companies' journey and so forth.
Yeah, I want to go back quickly to the model you guys are executing that, let's, for lack of a better phrase, just call it like a scientific or data grounded kind of model, operating from science and yet with a humanistic kind of approach to it. How has that changed your hiring requirements, or has it? I mean, are you looking for a different kind of like individual now to join your organization?
We are, but quite honestly, for me, the basic elements of knowing and understanding customer success must be there. And quite often, most people who has a customer success background will apply to a customer success job. For me, it's this tenacity and grit, right? I would like to give it a technical attribute, but it's more that skill that I find are the most successful. You know, they will go in and say, hey, you need this. Suddenly an upsell occurs, suddenly a cross-sell without selling. They'll go in and go to a customer and say, well, I know you're beating up on me on this, but if you guys don't adopt this other thing, you're going to be screwed. And those kinds of conversation, you know, it takes some kind of attitude to get that done. And I would like to go on the softer side and say grit and this persistence that is an attribute. That's what we look for to make sure that people can come in, because you will get people resonating with the cause and the purpose and the missions and really wanting to buy into that, and they come full throttle based on that. But when you look at that attribute that says they have this grit and persistence in sticking with it, and if they believe in what you're doing as a value, they'll make sure the customers are consuming it as a value.
Yeah, that's terrific. Great. Final question before I go to the Q&A. So Chris, you're a really warm, engaging person. I've known you a while and believe you have an evolved notion of community. So we talk a lot these days in customer success about community, about building it as a way to extend opportunities for success for all customers. So my question is this: is there a risk for business in this strategy? Are there pitfalls that leaders should be aware of and that they should avoid?
Yeah, I mean, avoid closed-mindedness, avoid protectionism, avoid this notion that you can do it all yourself. You probably can, but you can't do all of it very well. And there may be people who are better than you at a point solution that makes absolute sense, because you're never going to have the investment and focus to make everything extraordinarily well. So the key really here, and the pitfall, is to get into a protectionist-oriented mindset and close the door on partnerships, especially when you don't think there's a fiduciary gain, because most people look for immediate monetization of what they do without realizing that, you know, stickiness and retention, 4% on $1.1 billion, as an example, retention is huge if you think about it. So if people are out there thinking that, hey, show me the money immediately, without understanding ecosystem means this collection of things combining for the greater good of your customers, then you're in a world of hurt. And I guarantee you, within 5 years, you would not be in business.
Yeah, I think if it's not done well, your customer community will feel it. They'll feel that this isn't serving them well, to the degree that you promised it would be. So that would backfire on you. Okay, good. So a question from David Mangum in the audience earlier. I just want to get back to it. For the customer experience scores, customer experience and NPS, what is the cadence you measure these metrics with?
Again, we have to be very conscientious of survey fatigue. So it's twice a year, we would send out the surveys to really get, what is coming back. What does twice a year do for us? Because we have a model of listen, learn, and act. The first survey is sent, we get the response. All surveys that are negative are responded to, period. End of story. And then there is an action that's built around what are you going to do to remediate that? And everybody's held accountable to that remediation. In the second survey, we draw parallel to the first and what was said and what were the actions in between. So if we didn't see a change, that's where the accountability model comes in on leadership to say, hey guys, you had this, the customer told you this, what was done in between? And how do we change that? Or did we change that? So twice with an act, really, an act is not only about action, it's about accountability also. Got it.
Okay, Chris, I don't see any more questions from the audience. So I think, well, we're within 7 or 8 minutes from the end anyway. So I think we can draw it to a close. And Chris, I really want to thank you so much for your time today. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. And to the audience members, thanks for joining us. I hope you got some value from this. This is a great opportunity to hear from a CCO who's live and in the trenches, trying to lead an organization and drive customer centricity through multifaceted means of internal and external ecosystems. And I hope you appreciated, kind of this level of discussion. It's not for the faint of heart, I think. Is that fair to say, Chris? I mean, the ecosystem is what it is, but I think we both would agree it is the now and the future of business in the age of the subscription economy and beyond, actually. So you can't do it all yourself. I think you said that a couple of times, Chris, and I feel like that should be kind of the mantra of this webinar. So Thanks again, everybody. You'll get the link to the webinar, the recorded webinar, in the next 24 hours. And I appreciate your attendance. And Chris, once again, thanks very much. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, buddy. Nice chatting with you. Take care, bud.
Bye for now.
See ya. Bye.